opportunity to be around older people, so we would adopt neighbors, Nana and Max, who these were the old people in our family, right? They were both retirees. They lived next door to us when I was, getting out of grammar school. And in those days, there was a lot of family gatherings, a lot of jovial conversation, a lot of smoking cigarettes and drinking beer, too much all the way around. I mean, to the point where you walk through the kitchen and all the adults had cigarettes going, and you actually couldn't see all the children because the fog was so dense, right? And then I can just remember, having conversations with both of my parents, and as the night wore on, and they told me secrets about their childhood and things that they would never tell me if they hadn't been, drinking beer for 2 or 3 hours. And so the wisdom that I took away in those days was far different than the wisdom that I got out of meeting my wife's parents. Now, these were all teetotalers. They lived into their 90s routinely. The home that we live in, Jan's grandfather bought in 1890, and he passed away here at the age of 96 years old, carrying the ash can out to the road. And he just keeled over, and the neighborhood boys, found him and, you know, uh, got somebody to come and take care of, getting him inside so the family could deal with it. So that was in the 50s. But Jan's dad, when I met him in 1974, he was 74 years old, and he passed in 1983. But every time we got together, we would have one shot of Harvey's Bristol cream, and that was it. That was like a big deal for him to get this bottle out. I think it took us years to consume one whole bottle. But this was a man who he went to Middlebury and then he went to Yale Law School, and he'd been around, was in college when Woodrow Wilson was president, and so he had stories about every single president from the teens. Now we're into the 70s when I was meeting him, and he was not a guy who was appreciated or respected. This was a guy that had accomplished many, many things and had done so many things for children and boys. He was a Boy Scout leader, and he just never, I mean, when you're around somebody and you can tell that they've never been truly appreciated, what I got from him was, do not live into your 80s so that you can be a miserable old man. Find out how to love people and be loved so you can go to the why when you're 90 years old and not sit at home being frustrated looking at magazines, crisscrossing, through Time magazine stories that he didn't like. It was really very, very interesting. So the other thing that we did is we had my mother-in-law, who lived with us for almost 13 years after Jan's dad passed away. And her name was Mimi. And Mimi didn't graduate from high school. And she had a whole lifetime of experience that she could impart in a sentence or two. She was probably the old person in my life that I looked at and I got the most sage advice, the most true love from somebody who we both considered the other person to be kind of an antagonist. And we both let each other know that we missed each other terribly if we were apart for any period of time. And then we'd get right back at it again. It's kind of a funny thing. I don't know if you've ever lived with an in-law. Are you familiar with the terminology "no place to hide"? There's no secrets, no substitutions, and no timeouts. And thank God it was her, because as difficult as it could have been at particular times, looking back on it, I miss those days. I just completely miss when Mimi was around, and she'd walk into a room and she'd come forward, and it was always the sentence that preceded, Bill. There was almost always going to be work for old Bill after the Bill came out. She was just wonderful. Respect and appreciation. I don't think I thought about that much in those days. You know, I don't think my attention was on generating a conversation, inside of a space of respect and appreciation. Why would I have thought of that? I mean, there was nobody I knew that was using those kinds of concept, right? You're in a conversation to win, right? Isn't that what conversations are for? Who makes the best point? Who gets the last word? Who leaves the other person feeling broken? And I think those were the kind of conversations that we were having in the 80s and 90s that I recall. Till I went and took a course at the Y, which was very helpful.
And I'm thinking about, as you said that, I'm thinking about, being younger, and who did you like, really, who at that time, who was I focused on respecting? Teachers. Like, that was a very big thing. You respected your teacher. Like, you would never talk back to a teacher, or, you know, and it was just not even that you were afraid of getting in trouble. It was just like there was something about, you know, teachers and what they did, and there was a respect for teachers, and probably certain people that I don't even want to bring up in conversation.
You know what's funny about that is the and this I remember a guy. I was relatively new in the military at the time, and he said, you'll always show respect for the rank, and sometimes you get lucky and you can also show respect for the person holding the rank. And so you respect the role, you salute, you know, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you have that respect for the human that's occupying that position. That's something that was kind of earned behind it. And, and it was a very interesting thing. And I think about that with teachers. I'm sure we all had different relationships with the level of respect we had for certain teachers. Like we all had those teachers that really were very powerful in helping us discover who we were, or developing a passion for a certain subject or something, and then others that just kind of they did a job, and back then you're right, we were respectful of the teacher for being a teacher. It's it can be a little bit different now, but it is kind of interesting. That's like a nuance to respect. When you think about it, there's the role and then there's the person.
I love that differentiation, and that, you know, just the idea that, you can respect for a role, or not necessarily, you know, may the person may not necessarily be what you might focus on as being, um, you know, but the person may not be respected as the individual.
Yeah, and even like when we do organizational events, like I don't like the term master. I prefer to just be Ken. But then when we go into these formal events, there's a title. I have to be Master Caputo, and I don't push against that. That's me demonstrating respect for the rules that have been put in place by the person hosting the event. So, and it doesn't matter whether I agree with it. It's if I'm going to participate and they've been clear in the way that they would like, to practice certain things, then, I play by those rules and that's okay. So, and I think sometimes that can lead to some confusion too. It's, well, I don't agree with that. So therefore, I'm going to do it my way. It's like, well, but you're in someone else's home. So if they don't want you to put your feet on the coffee table, it's their home. It doesn't matter what you do in your home, you know? So yeah, so it was just there's some interesting lessons like that that again, Bill, you talk about context. Like I think for some people, appreciation is something that they get early on. Like I had a deep appreciation for my grandfather, because he was my adopted grandfather. So he didn't, he accepted me into a Sicilian family as blood, and that was an incredibly powerful thing that he did not need to do, because I wasn't blood, but he treated me like that. So I had an appreciation for being fortunate enough to have family that you wouldn't if you just had your family. And that was just like an accepted thing, so I had a very unique context that allowed for appreciation to kind of come to the forefront where, a lot of my friends growing up didn't. They just had grandparents. They had a dad, or a mom or whatever it was. So it's interesting how all those things are so contextual in nature.
Yeah, there's another element to it. If I look back at the first, well, through the 1950s and 60s, there were an awful lot of cultural family-based mores and a lot of family. Like for instance, I had very very good Irish friends, and the thing that really was remarkable about my buddy John's mother was whenever she spoke about the men in the family, it was almost like she was describing Hercules or Superman. As far as she was concerned, these were the most important and the most impactful figures in her life. And she just, everything she said was so respectful of who they were, especially the ones that had passed. And so that stuck, really stuck out to me as a memorable cultural thing that I hadn't seen in other families. So like my family, we didn't even know where we came from. My grandfather was very tight-lipped about where his people were from, but we knew we were Germans, and we liked beer, and that was good. Uh, but at the same time, I never heard anybody speaking respectfully about other people in the family, if you will. There was no, cultural upbringing that you will behave in a certain way other than what my parents told us. And then we didn't necessarily observe them following their own rules, if you know what I mean. So it was more or less that our generation got talked to as opposed to being led by demonstration. And the other folks that I was around that impressed me, like how their families worked. I don't know, maybe they were modeling a behavior because I was there and it was out of the ordinary. I'll never know. But it left me feeling that there are some families and some cultures that are no longer getting that passed from generation to generation. And we have far more broken homes these days. There's a lot more, kids that are raised with an absent parent, or, they're not even sure where or who their parents are in a lot of instances. It's a different time for people to be learning. And if they're not getting it in school, where are they going to be getting this kind of a conversation from? You and I were fortunate to have older people in our family that could model something for us that we felt was valuable that we could carry on. And where do people who don't know that they don't know this, where do they get it?
I think when you talk about schools too, like teachers, and I don't know if that level of respect is still there that we had as children in high school and our all of our lives. And I do recall like being in high school, and I had such an appreciation for learning from, especially from good teachers. I
Yeah.
liked the hard teachers. I liked the ones that other people thought were mean. I wanted to learn. I really did. And I'll never forget one time in this I can't even remember what subject he taught. It was some science, but and he was a well-liked teacher, and he was tough, but I always got good grades. But